In the spring of 1882, the wealthiest man in 3 counties stood at the altar with a woman wearing nothing but rags. Cole Remington owned half the cattle ranches from here to Denver, had more gold than the bank could hold, and could have married any belle in the territory. Instead, he chose her, a stranger who appeared one morning at his ranch gate, dust-covered and silent, with eyes that held secrets deeper than any mineshaft. The town called him foolish. They whispered she was a con artist, a desperate fortune hunter, maybe worse. But Cole saw something they didn't, something in the way she moved, the way she spoke when she finally did. What was it about this mysterious woman that made a wealthy man risk everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun broke over Remington Ranch like molten copper poured across the high plains. Cole Remington stood on the wide porch of his timber-framed house, coffee steaming in his weathered hands, watching his world wake up. 43 years old, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd built something lasting. His dark hair showed silver at the temples now, and the lines around his eyes told stories of decades spent squinting into harsh sunlight and harder truths. The ranch stretched out before him like a kingdom carved from stubbornness and sweat. 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, fed by Crystal Creek that never ran dry even in the driest summers. His cattle, nearly 2,000 head of prime Herefords, dotted the landscape like rust-colored jewels against the spring grass. The bunkhouse chimney sent up its morning smoke, and he could hear the ranch hands beginning their day with the familiar sounds of men who knew their work. Cole had inherited this land from his father, Thomas Remington, who'd staked his claim here in 1851 when Montana was still wild territory. Thomas had died 10 years ago, leaving Cole everything along with a simple piece of advice that still echoed in quiet moments. Build something worth keeping, his father had said. Build something that matters when the gold runs out and the easy times fade. He'd taken that advice to heart. While other ranchers gambled on silver strikes and railroad speculation, Cole invested in land, water rights, and breeding stock. He'd traveled to England twice to study their cattle operations, brought back techniques that doubled his yields. He owned the lumber mill in town, held partnerships in the grain elevator and the mercantile. His wealth wasn't flashy, but it was solid as bedrock. The town of Silver Ridge lay 6 miles east, nestled in a valley where 3 trails converged. Population 800 and growing, with a main street that boasted 2 saloons, a hotel, the Cattleman's Bank where Cole served on the board, and enough businesses to support the surrounding ranches and homesteads. It was a good town, prosperous and mostly peaceful, the kind of place where a man's word still meant something and debts were paid on time. Cole's position in that town was unique. As the wealthiest landowner and most successful businessman, he commanded respect. Yet he'd never been one to lord his status over others. He treated his ranch hands fairly, paid better wages than most, and never asked a man to do work he wouldn't do himself. His word was bond, and in 30 years of business dealings, he'd never once gone back on a handshake agreement. But wealth and respect didn't fill the emptiness of a big house at night. His mother, Sarah, had died when he was 25, victim to pneumonia during a harsh winter. His father had followed her 10 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as if he'd decided he'd lived long enough without his beloved wife. Cole understood that kind of love now, even if he'd never experienced it himself. He'd had opportunities, of course. Every widow and unmarried woman within 50 miles had made their interest known at one point or another. Some were genuine, drawn to his quiet strength and steady nature. Others saw only the ranch, the bank account, the social standing. Cole had learned early to tell the difference. His father's leather journal, kept in the study, contained wisdom about that very thing. Character shows itself in adversity, Thomas had written. Any fool can be pleasant when times are good. Watch how people behave when there's nothing to gain. Miguel Ortega, his foreman, emerged from the bunkhouse and raised a hand in greeting. 20 years they'd worked together, starting when Miguel was a green kid of 18 and Cole was building his first herd. Now Miguel had a wife and 3 children in a house Cole had built for them on the eastern edge of the property. Trust like that wasn't bought. It was earned through shared hardship and mutual respect. The ranch hands gathered for breakfast in the main house kitchen, a tradition Cole's mother had started and he'd maintained. Cookie, whose real name was Joseph Palmer but whom nobody had called that in 30 years, presided over the wood stove with the authority of a general commanding troops. At 72 he moved slower than he once had, but his biscuits were still the finest in 3 counties and his coffee could wake the dead. Young Ben Crawford, barely 19, sat at the long table polishing his boots. He'd come on 6 months ago, orphaned and desperate for work. Cole had given him a chance despite his lack of experience. The boy had proved himself a quick learner with a natural way with horses. He reminded Cole of himself at that age, hungry to prove his worth and willing to work until his hands bled. The rhythm of ranch life suited Cole. Each season brought its own demands. Spring meant calving, mending winter damage to fences and buildings, preparing for the long months ahead. Summer was branding, moving cattle to high pasture, cutting and storing hay. Fall brought the cattle down and the hard decisions about which stock to keep and which to sell. Winter was maintenance, planning, and the occasional rescue of foolish cattle who wandered too far in a storm. His weekly trips to town followed a pattern too. Saturday mornings, he'd ride in for the Cattlemen's Association meeting at the bank. Harrison Fletcher, the bank president, ran those meetings with the precision of a railroad schedule. Fletcher was a careful man, always dressed in suits ordered from Chicago, always calculating the angles. Cole respected his business acumen, even if he didn't particularly like the man's cold manner. Sheriff Tom Brennan was different. They'd known each other since childhood, had gotten into their share of scrapes together before responsibility found them both. Tom had pinned on the badge 20 years ago and had kept Silver Ridge safe through gold rushes, cattle wars, and the occasional outbreak of frontier justice. He was honest, fair, and one of the few people Cole trusted completely. After the business meeting, Cole would stop by the general store to settle accounts and check on his investments in the mercantile. Then lunch at the Silver Ridge Hotel dining room, where he'd catch up on town news and local gossip. Afternoons were for visiting the lumber mill, checking production numbers, and making decisions about contracts and deliveries. Sundays he attended church, sitting in the same pew his parents had occupied, listening to Reverend Morrison's sermons about grace and redemption. The Reverend was getting on in years now, his voice not as strong as it once was, but his wisdom had only deepened. After service, there were the inevitable invitations to Sunday dinner from various families, most of them with unmarried daughters of appropriate age. Cole had declined them all politely for years now. He'd learned that loneliness was preferable to the wrong company. He'd seen too many men marry for convenience or social pressure, watched them grow bitter and distant over the years. His parents had loved each other deeply, genuinely, and he'd rather have no marriage at all than settle for less than what they'd shared. But the emptiness of the big house wore on him more as the years passed. He was 43 now, successful by any measure, respected by the community, yet he came home each night to silence. He'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd set his standards too high, if he was fooled to believe in the kind of partnership his parents had known. His father's journal offered comfort in those moments. Thomas had written extensively about his courtship of Sarah, how he'd known from their first conversation that she was different. She didn't care about his prospects or his property. She wanted to know his thoughts, his dreams, what he believed about the world. She challenged him, made him think harder, be better. That's what partnership means, Thomas had written. Finding someone who makes you want to build something greater than yourself. Cole closed the journal and set it back on the shelf in his study. The leather was worn smooth from years of handling, the pages yellowed but still legible. It was one of his most treasured possessions, more valuable than all the land and cattle combined. The most persistent of his would-be suitors was Mrs. Henrietta Walsh, though not for herself. The banker's wife had made it her mission to see Cole properly married, preferably to one of the eligible young women she championed at every opportunity. She hosted regular social gatherings, and Cole's attendance was always anticipated with the kind of military precision that suggested battle plans were involved. At the last such event 3 months ago, she'd cornered him near the punch bowl with Miss Catherine Hartwell in tow. Catherine was a lovely girl of 25, daughter of a successful rancher from the next county. She had impeccable manners, a pleasant voice, and absolutely nothing to say that Cole found remotely interesting. Their conversation had limped along for 10 excruciating minutes before he'd excused himself, citing early morning ranch duties. Mrs. Walsh had not been pleased. She'd made her displeasure known through pointed comments at church and meaningful looks whenever their paths crossed in town. Cole bore it with the same patience he applied to breaking horses. Eventually, she'd tire of the campaign and move on to another project. What troubled him more were the women who saw only his wealth. They'd flutter and simper, compliment his ranch and his success, ask pointed questions about property lines and cattle numbers. Their fathers would appear shortly after, mentioning business opportunities and potential partnerships. Cole had learned to spot these maneuvers from 100 yards away. His mother had warned him about this before she died. "You're a catch, son," she'd said with a gentle smile. "But make sure the woman who catches you wants Cole Remington the man, not just the ranch and the bank account. Your father was a poor prospector when I met him. I married him for his heart, not his holdings. Everything else came after." That memory sustained him through the lonely evenings and the well-meaning but misguided matchmaking attempts. He'd rather be alone than be valued for the wrong reasons. His father had built this ranch through honest work and careful planning. Cole had expanded it through the same principles. He wanted a partner who understood that, who valued character and integrity over comfort and status. The spring morning air carried the scent of sage and new grass. Cole watched Miguel organizing the day's work, assigning tasks to the hands with the easy authority of a man who knew his business. They'd ride out to check the southern fence line today, look for breaks or weak spots that winter might have revealed. Tomorrow, they'd start moving cattle to the higher pastures, where the grass was already thick and green. It was a good life, an honest life. Cole knew men who'd made fortunes through speculation and schemes, who'd built empires on other people's losses. That had never appealed to him. He preferred the straightforward nature of ranching. You put in the work, treated the land and animals right, made smart decisions, and you prospered. There was a clean simplicity to it that matched his nature. He finished his coffee and set the cup on the porch rail. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountains to the west in shades of purple and gold. Another day was beginning, another day of familiar routines and satisfying work. Another day of coming home to an empty house. Cole shook off the melancholy. Self-pity was a luxury he didn't indulge. He had more than most men ever dreamed of having. He had purpose, respect, security. If companionship eluded him, well, that was the price of having standards. Better to be alone than poorly matched. He stepped off the porch and headed toward the barn where Miguel was saddling horses. The day's work was waiting, and work had always been his most reliable companion. The land didn't judge him, the cattle didn't whisper behind his back, and the ranch didn't care whether he was married or single. It simply required his attention, his effort, and his commitment. That was something Cole understood. That was something he could give without reservation or doubt. And if sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, he wondered what it might be like to share this life with someone who truly understood it, well, those were thoughts best left for the darkness. Morning was for action, for purpose, for the tangible work of building something that would outlast him. 3 weeks before the wedding that would shake Silver Ridge to its foundations, Cole Remington woke before dawn, as he always did. He dressed in the dark, pulled on his boots, and made his way to the kitchen, where Cookie already had coffee brewing. The old man nodded a greeting but didn't speak. They'd shared enough mornings that words weren't necessary. Cole took his cup outside and watched the first pale light touch the eastern horizon. Today he'd ride the eastern boundary, the section that bordered what used to be James Whitfield's property. Whitfield had disappeared 15 years ago, leaving behind questions that never got answered, and a land claim that eventually went to auction. Cole had considered buying it, but something held him back. His father had known Whitfield, had spoken of him with respect, and the circumstances of his vanishing had never sat right with Thomas Remington. The memory stirred something uncomfortable in Cole's chest. His father had spent months looking into Whitfield's disappearance, asking questions that made certain people nervous. Then Thomas had let it drop, though Cole never understood why. Years later, reading through his father's journal after his death, Cole found a single entry that shed some light. "Some battles can't be won with honor intact," Thomas had written. "Sometimes you have to choose between justice and survival. I chose to survive so my son would have a future. God forgive me." Cole had puzzled over those words for years. What had his father discovered? What threat had forced him to abandon his investigation? The questions lingered like smoke, never quite dissipating, never quite forming into something solid enough to grasp. He saddled his bay gelding, a steady horse named Copper, who'd been with him for 8 years. Miguel joined him, along with Ben, who was eager to learn the boundaries and landmarks. They rode east as the sun climbed, checking fence posts and wire, looking for signs of breaks or tampering. Cattle had a way of finding weaknesses, and a determined steer could cause expensive problems if left unchecked. The land along the eastern boundary was rougher than the rest of the ranch. Rocky outcroppings broke through the soil, and Crystal Creek ran through a narrow canyon before opening into the valley. It was beautiful country, stark and honest, the kind of landscape that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. They were following the creek when Copper suddenly shied, ears pinned back. Cole steadied him and looked for the source of alarm. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then Miguel pointed downstream, toward a cluster of willows growing thick near the water's edge. Something lay among the roots, something that didn't belong. Cole dismounted and approached carefully, one hand on the revolver he wore out of habit rather than expectation of trouble. As he drew closer, his breath caught. It was a person, a woman, curled on her side, her dress torn and filthy, her feet wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been part of a petticoat. He knelt beside her and checked for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. Her skin was hot to the touch, fever burning through her. She'd been out here for days by the look of her, exposed to the elements, without food or adequate water. How she'd survived this long was a mystery. Miguel and Ben came up behind him. Ben gasped, but Miguel just shook his head slowly. They'd both seen hardship before, knew what desperation looked like, but this was something more. This woman hadn't just wandered off from a wagon train or gotten lost on a trail. She'd been running from something, running hard and terrified enough to risk dying in the wilderness, rather than face whatever pursued her. Cole noticed her hand first, clutched tight against her chest, even in unconsciousness. He gently pried her fingers open and found what she'd been holding. A silver locket, tarnished but still beautiful, the kind of thing a person kept because it meant something beyond its monetary value. He didn't open it. That felt like a violation of whatever privacy she had left. He looked up at Miguel and made a decision that would change everything. "Lift her carefully," Cole said to Miguel. "Ben, ride ahead and tell Cookie to prepare the guest room. Have him send someone for Dr. Whitmore. Tell him it's urgent, but keep the details quiet. No need to start tongues wagging before we know what we're dealing with." Ben nodded and spurred his horse toward the ranch house. Miguel and Cole fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their coats and a couple of sturdy branches. They lifted the woman as gently as they could, but even in her fevered state, she moaned at the movement. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, unfocused and wild with fear. "Safe," Cole said quietly, though he doubted she could hear him. "You're safe now." The ride back to the ranch took twice as long as usual. They kept to a careful pace, trying to minimize the jolting that might worsen her condition. Cole studied her face as they rode. She was young, maybe late 20s, with strong features that spoke of determination rather than delicate beauty. Even covered in dust and grime, even burning with fever, there was something about her that commanded attention. A dignity that suffering hadn't erased. Cookie had the guest room ready when they arrived, fresh linens on the bed and water heating on the stove. Miguel's wife Rosa appeared within minutes, her capable hands already reaching for the woman before the men had fully carried her through the door. Rosa had raised 6 children and buried 2. She knew suffering and she knew survival. "Out," Rosa commanded, shooing them from the room. "I will clean her and make her decent before the doctor arrives. You men stand guard if you must, but give her some privacy." Cole retreated to the hallway, pacing while Rosa worked behind the closed door. He could hear water splashing, Rosa's gentle murmuring in Spanish, the occasional moan from the woman. 20 minutes later, Rosa emerged with a bundle of filthy rags that had once been clothing. "She is very sick," Rosa said quietly. "The fever is bad, but she is strong. I can see it. She has survived much already. We must pray she survives this too." Dr. Whitmore arrived an hour later, his black medical bag in hand and questions in his eyes. Cole met him on the porch and gave him the bare facts. Found her by the creek, unconscious, fevered, appears to have been traveling rough for several days. The doctor nodded and went inside without further comment. Whitmore had been practicing medicine in Silver Ridge for 30 years. He'd learned long ago not to ask questions that patients might not want to answer. The examination took another half hour. When Whitmore emerged, he looked grave. "She's severely dehydrated and the fever's dangerously high. Exposure, exhaustion, possibly infection from injuries I found on her feet. She's also malnourished. This didn't happen overnight, Cole. She's been struggling for a while." "Will she recover?" Cole asked. Whitmore shrugged. "That's up to her now and the Lord. I've done what I can. Keep her cool. Get fluids in her when she's conscious enough to swallow, and watch for signs the fever's breaking. If it doesn't break in the next day or two, well, prepare yourself." "I'll sit with her," Cole said. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "That'll start talk." "Let it start," Cole replied. "Can't leave her alone in this condition." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Rosa can help. She's got healing hands, that one. I'll check back tomorrow." After Whitmore left, Cole pulled a chair close to the bedside. The woman lay still, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her dark hair, now clean, spread across the pillow like spilled ink. Rosa had dressed her in one of Cole's mother's old nightgowns, something simple and white that made her look even more fragile than she was. The silver locket lay on the bedside table where Rosa had placed it. Cole picked it up, feeling the weight of it, the warmth from where it had been clutched against the woman's heart. His thumb found the catch, but he stopped himself from opening it. Not yet, not without permission. The first night was the worst. The fever climbed higher as darkness fell, and the woman began to thrash and mutter words that made no sense. Cole and Rosa took turns holding her down gently, applying cool cloths to her forehead, trying to get water past her cracked lips. She fought them unconsciously, her body believing it was still running from whatever terror had driven her into the wilderness. "Catherine," she whispered at one point. "Have to find Catherine. They can't know. The mine. Oh God, the mine." Cole leaned closer, trying to catch more, but she'd slipped back into incomprehensible murmuring. Who was Catherine? What mine? The questions piled up with no answers in sight. Around midnight, she opened her eyes fully for the first time. They were grey, the color of storm clouds, and for a moment they focused directly on Cole with startling clarity. Then fear flooded them, and she tried to pull away, a sound of pure terror escaping her throat. "You're safe," Cole said firmly but gently. "You're at Remington Ranch. No one's going to hurt you here. I give you my word." Something in his voice, or perhaps the steadiness of his gaze, seemed to reach her. The panic receded slightly, though wariness remained. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. Rosa brought water, and together they helped her drink. Most of it spilled, but some made it down her throat. "Sleep now," Rosa said softly, her hand stroking the woman's hair like she would a frightened child. "You are safe here. Rest." The woman's eyes drifted closed again, but Cole thought he saw a single tear escape before sleep claimed her once more. It was the tear of someone who'd forgotten what safety felt like, who couldn't quite believe it even when it was offered. By dawn, the fever finally broke. Cole dozed in his chair, exhausted from the long night, and woke to find the woman watching him. Her eyes were clearer now, more focused, though still shadowed with pain and something deeper. Grief maybe, or guilt. "You found me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "By the creek," Cole confirmed. "You've been very sick. Doctor says you'll recover, but it'll take time." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there were tears. "I didn't think anyone would find me. I thought I'd die out there." "What's your name?" Cole asked gently. She hesitated, and in that hesitation Cole saw calculation. She was deciding what to tell him, how much truth to offer. It was a look he'd seen in business negotiations, in poker games, in moments when people had to choose between honesty and self-preservation. "Eliza," she finally said. "My name is Eliza." He didn't believe it was her real name, but he nodded anyway. "I'm Cole Remington. This is my ranch. You're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel." Her hand moved to her chest, searching, and panic flared in her eyes again. The locket! There was a locket. Cole picked it up from the bedside table and placed it gently in her palm. She clutched it like a lifeline, relief washing over her face. Whatever was in that locket mattered more to her than her own life. Cole had seen men die for gold, for land, for pride. This woman had nearly died, holding onto a piece of jewelry. That told him something important about her character. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." "Maybe you'll tell me someday," Cole said. "But not today. Today you need to rest and heal. Everything else can wait." Rosa brought broth, and they managed to get half a bowl into Eliza before exhaustion claimed her again. Cole watched her sleep, noting details he'd missed before. Her hands were calloused, the kind of roughness that came from work, not genteel pursuits. Her arms showed old bruises in various stages of healing. Someone had hurt her repeatedly before she'd run. The protective instinct that surged through him was unexpected in its intensity. He'd known this woman for less than a day, didn't even know her real name, yet already he felt responsible for her safety. 5 days passed before Eliza was strong enough to sit up without assistance. Cole had moved a comfortable chair near the window so she could look out at the ranch while she recovered. She spent hours there, watching the daily rhythm of the place with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every detail. Rosa brought her meals 3 times a day, and gradually Eliza's appetite returned. Color came back to her cheeks, though the haunted look never quite left her eyes. She was polite, grateful, but carefully guarded. Every question Cole asked was met with vague answers or deflection. "Where are you from?" "Somewhere east." "Do you have family?" "Not anymore." "What brought you to Montana?" "A fresh start." Each response was technically an answer while revealing nothing of substance. Cole didn't push. He recognized the walls people built around painful truths. His father's journal had taught him patience. Sometimes the best way to learn a person's story is to wait until they're ready to tell it, Thomas had written. Forcing confession only hardens the defenses. So instead, Cole simply spent time in her company. He'd sit in the room after supper, reading or going over ranch accounts while she looked out the window. Sometimes they'd talk about inconsequential things, the weather, the cattle, the way the light changed as evening approached. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who don't feel compelled to fill every moment with words. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Eliza finally spoke of something real. The light outside had faded to purple twilight, and a coyote was calling in the distance. "You have a beautiful place here," she said softly. "You must be very proud of what you've built." "My father built it," Cole replied. "I've just tried to maintain it and maybe add a little." "That's more difficult than starting fresh," Eliza said. "Living up to someone else's legacy, trying to honor what they created while making it your own." Cole looked at her with new attention. That was insight, not idle conversation. "You sound like you know something about that." She was quiet for a long moment. "My father built something too. Not a ranch, but something valuable. Something worth protecting. I failed him." The pain in her voice was raw enough that Cole didn't probe further. Instead, he said, "Sometimes circumstances defeat us, no matter how hard we fight. That's not failure. That's just life being harder than we expected." She turned to look at him, those gray eyes searching his face. "You're a kind man, Cole Remington. Kinder than most would be to a stranger who appeared half dead on their land." "Common decency isn't kindness," Cole said. It's just being human. You'd be surprised how uncommon common decency can be, Eliza replied. The next day, Miguel came to Cole with news that set his instincts on alert. Sheriff Brennan had ridden out to the ranch, and he had questions. Cole met him on the porch, offering coffee that Tom accepted gratefully. "I've been hearing interesting rumors," Tom said without preamble. "Word in town is you've got a mysterious woman staying here. People are curious, Cole, and curiosity in Silver Ridge has a way of turning into something uglier." "She needed help," Cole said simply. "I provided it. Nothing mysterious about that." Tom studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. "There are also rumors about strangers asking questions in town. 2 men, rough types, looking for a woman. They didn't give names, but their descriptions were detailed enough to be specific. Dark hair, late 20s, might be injured or sick." Cole felt his jaw tighten. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, because they didn't ask me directly. They were smart enough to avoid the law, but they asked at the saloon, the hotel, the livery. Someone's bound to mention a woman fitting that description showed up at your place." "How long ago was this?" Cole asked. 3 days, Tom said. "They moved on yesterday, headed south. But Cole, if someone's hunting this woman, you need to know what you're mixed up in." Cole invited Tom inside and led him to the study where they could talk privately. The sheriff's concern was genuine, born of years of friendship and professional caution. Cole respected that enough to offer more truth than he'd given anyone else. "I don't know the full story yet," Cole admitted. "But I know she's running from something that terrified her enough to risk dying in the wilderness. That tells me whatever she's running from is worse than death." Tom leaned back in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. The 2 men who were asking questions, they had the look of hired muscle. Not outlaws exactly, but not honest men either. The kind who do dirty work for people who don't want to get their own hands soiled. "You think they'll come back?" Cole asked. "Depends on how badly someone wants to find her," Tom said. "And how much they're willing to pay. Men like that follow money, not conscience." After Tom left, Cole went to check on Eliza. She was sitting in her chair, but her posture was rigid, her hands gripping the armrests. She'd heard the sheriff's voice, had probably guessed the subject of conversation. "There are men looking for you," Cole said gently. "Tom wanted me to know." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, defeat shadowed her expression. "I should leave. I've brought trouble to your door, and you've been nothing but kind to me. I won't repay that by putting you in danger." "Where would you go?" Cole asked. "You're barely strong enough to walk across the room, let alone travel. And if these men are as determined as Tom suggests, running won't help. They'll just find you somewhere else, somewhere you don't have protection." "I can't ask you to fight my battles," Eliza said. "You're not asking," Cole replied. "I'm offering. But I need to know what we're up against. I need to know the truth." She was quiet for so long that Cole thought she might refuse again. Then she reached into the pocket of the robe Rosa had given her and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a telegram, partially burned along one edge. The writing faded but still legible. "She fled Denver, stop heading Montana Territory, stop. Carson Brothers pursuing, stop Red Rock Mine location, critical stop, eliminate on sight." Cole read it twice, his mind working through the implications. The Carson Brothers. He knew that name, knew their reputation for claim-jumping and violence. They'd been implicated in a dozen suspicious deaths over the years, but nothing ever stuck. They had money, influence, and no conscience. "Red Rock Mine," Cole said quietly. "That's near where my father's old partner disappeared. James Whitfield." Eliza's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "You knew my father?" The world tilted slightly. Cole looked at her with new understanding, pieces falling into place. James Whitfield's daughter. That's who she was. That's why the locket had seemed important, why she'd clutched it even in fever dreams. The photograph inside must be of her father. "I was young when he disappeared," Cole said. "But my father knew him well. They were partners in some ventures. Thomas always believed James didn't just vanish. He suspected foul play, but could never prove it." Tears rolled down Eliza's cheeks. "He didn't vanish. He was murdered. The Carson brothers killed him because he found silver on his claim. Rich veins, enough to make a fortune. They wanted it for themselves, so they eliminated the rightful owner." "How do you know this?" Cole asked. Because I found proof, Eliza said. Documents my father had hidden before he died. Assay reports, claim registrations, letters detailing the Carsons' threats. I was 15 when he disappeared. My mother died 6 months later from grief and poverty. I went to live with my aunt in Denver. Last year, while settling her estate after she passed, I found a box my father had left with her for safekeeping. Inside was everything I needed to prove the mine belonged to him, and that the Carsons stole it through murder. And you came here to reclaim it, Cole said. I came here for justice, Eliza corrected. The mine matters less than the truth. My father was an honest man who built something valuable through hard work. The Carsons are thieves and killers who've profited from his death for 15 years. I wanted the world to know what they did. Cole sat down heavily in the chair across from her. His father's cryptic journal entry made sense now. Thomas had known something about James Whitfield's death, had been close enough to the truth to understand the danger. That's why he'd backed away from the investigation. He'd chosen to protect his son rather than pursue justice for his friend. The weight of that sacrifice settled on Cole's shoulders. His father had carried that burden silently, had lived with the guilt of abandoning James rather than risk Cole's life. It was the kind of impossible choice that defined a man's character, and Thomas had chosen family over justice. Cole couldn't fault him for that, even if part of him wished his father had fought. But Thomas was gone now, and Cole had the chance to finish what his father couldn't. He looked at Eliza, seeing her with new eyes. She wasn't just a woman in need. She was the daughter of his father's friend, seeking to right a 15-year-old wrong. That created an obligation beyond common decency. My father would want me to help you, Cole said. And more than that, it's the right thing to do. The Carsons have gotten away with murder and theft for too long. It's dangerous, Eliza warned. They've killed before, and they won't hesitate to kill again. Anyone who stands between them and that mine is at risk. Then we'll be careful, Cole said, but we'll also be thorough. If we're going to take on the Carson brothers, we need evidence, witnesses, and the law on our side. We can't just accuse them. We need to prove it beyond doubt. Over the next few days, Cole and Eliza formed a plan. She showed him the documents she'd managed to save before fleeing Denver. Assay reports showing rich silver deposits on the Whitfield claim. Letters from James to his lawyer detailing threats from the Carsons. A journal entry from the week before he disappeared, noting that he'd filed complaints with the territorial marshal about claim jumping and intimidation. This is good, Cole said, studying the papers. But we need more. We need someone who witnessed what happened or knows where your father's body is buried. Without that, the Carsons can claim these documents are forgeries or that your father sold them the claim before he left. There was a man, Eliza said slowly, a prospector named Samuel Hayes, who worked with my father. He testified at the initial investigation that my father had simply abandoned his claim, but I never believed it. Sam Hayes and my father were friends. He wouldn't have lied unless someone forced him to or paid him well enough. Where is Hayes now? Cole asked. Last I heard, he's still prospecting in the territory. Moves around a lot, but he usually spends winters in Silver Ridge. Cole made a note to ask Sheriff Brennan about Hayes. If they could find him and convince him to tell the truth, that might be the key to everything. But even as they planned, the threat grew closer. Miguel came to Cole 3 days later with troubling news. One of the ranch hands had been approached in town by a stranger asking pointed questions about the Remington Ranch, how many people lived there, what the routines were, whether Cole had any guests. The hand, loyal and smart, had played dumb and given vague answers. But the message was clear. Someone was gathering intelligence, preparing for something. The Carson brothers or their men were circling, getting ready to make a move. Cole increased security around the ranch. He positioned men to watch the approaches, made sure everyone was armed, and established signals in case of trouble. Miguel took charge of organizing the defenses with the efficiency of a man who'd seen conflict before. Eliza watched these preparations with growing guilt. "This is my fight," she said one evening. "I should face it alone, not drag you and your men into danger. Your fight became mine the moment I found you by that creek," Cole said. "Besides, This isn't just about you anymore. The Carsons represent everything wrong with this territory. Men who think wealth and violence give them the right to take what they want. If we don't stand against that, we're complicit in it." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something more. Something that made his heart beat a little faster. The following Sunday, Cole made a decision that would force the town's hand. He invited Eliza to accompany him to church services. She'd been at the ranch for nearly 3 weeks, was strong enough now to venture out, and Cole wanted Silver Ridge to see her not as a rumor, but as a real person worthy of respect. Rosa helped Eliza prepare, lending her a simple but respectable dress in deep blue that had belonged to Miguel's eldest daughter. It fit reasonably well, and with her hair properly arranged and her health restored, Eliza looked nothing like the near corpse Cole had found by the creek. She looked like what she was, a woman of intelligence and dignity who'd survived circumstances that would have destroyed someone weaker. The ride into town was quiet. Cole could feel Eliza's nervousness, the way her hands gripped the seat of the wagon tighter than necessary. He understood. She was about to face the judgment of an entire community, people who'd heard rumors and formed opinions without knowing a single true fact about her. Church was already filling when they arrived. Cole helped Eliza down from the wagon, offered his arm, and walked with her up the steps. The conversations died as they entered. Every head turned, every eye fixed on them with an intensity that would have wilted a less courageous woman. But Eliza kept her chin up and her gaze steady, meeting their stares without flinching. Cole led her to his family's pew, the one that bore a small brass plate with the Remington name. It was a statement of sorts. By sitting her there, he was claiming her as someone under his protection, someone who belonged. The whispers started immediately. Mrs. Henrietta Walsh, seated 3 rows behind, made no effort to lower her voice. "Well, I never. The audacity. Does he have no sense of propriety at all?" Her husband, Harrison Fletcher, the banker, sat beside her with a calculating expression that Cole didn't like. Fletcher had always been ambitious, always looking for advantage. The way he studied Eliza suggested he saw her as a problem or an opportunity, and Cole wasn't sure which concerned him more. Reverend Morrison began the service with a sermon about judgment and mercy, and Cole wondered if the old preacher had chosen that topic deliberately. Morrison was nobody's fool. He'd have heard the gossip, would have seen Cole and Eliza enter together. "Judge not, lest ye be judged," Morrison intoned, his voice carrying through the small church. "For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Cole felt Eliza relax slightly beside him. At least the Reverend wasn't condemning her without cause. After the service, Cole steeled himself for the social gauntlet that followed. Most Sundays, people lingered outside the church, catching up on news and exchanging pleasantries. Today would be no different, except that he and Eliza would be the center of attention. Martha Caldwell, the mayor's wife, approached them first. She was a kind woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a generous heart. Cole had always liked her, appreciated her straightforward nature. "Mr. Remington," she said warmly, "won't you introduce me to your guest?" "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Miss Eliza Whitfield," Cole said, using her real name deliberately. "She's been recovering from illness at the ranch." Martha's eyes widened slightly at the name Whitfield, but she recovered quickly and extended her hand. "Miss Whitfield, it's a pleasure. Any friend of Cole's is welcome in Silver Ridge." The use of the Whitfield name rippled through the crowd. Several of the older residents, those who'd been in Silver Ridge 15 years ago, exchanged glances. They remembered James Whitfield, remembered the scandal of his disappearance. Sheriff Brennan approached next, tipping his hat. "Miss Whitfield, good to see you up and about. Cole's been taking good care of you, I trust." "He's been more than generous," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I owe him my life." Not everyone was as gracious. Mrs. Walsh made a point of turning her back when Cole tried to make introductions. Several of her friends followed suit, creating a small wall of disapproval that was impossible to miss. Cole felt his jaw tighten, but Eliza touched his arm gently. "It's all right," she murmured. "I expected this." The days settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and charged with possibility. Eliza grew stronger, and with strength came restlessness. She couldn't remain idle, wouldn't accept hospitality without contributing. So she began helping around the ranch in small ways that revealed more about her than any conversation could. She knew horses, not the superficial knowledge of someone who'd taken riding lessons, but the deep understanding that came from years of working with them. She could spot lameness before it became obvious, knew which herbs helped with colic, and had a gentle way of handling even the most skittish animals. Ben watched her work with copper one afternoon, curing the gelding of a habit of shying at shadows, and came away shaking his head in admiration. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "My father," Eliza replied simply. He believed that understanding horses was essential to surviving in this territory. "He taught me everything he knew." Cole observed these moments from a distance, adding them to his growing understanding of who Eliza Whitfield truly was. She'd been raised not as a delicate daughter, but as a partner in her father's endeavors. James had prepared her for a hard life, had given her practical skills that most women of her class would never possess. In the evenings they talked, real conversations now, not the guarded exchanges of those first days. She told him about her childhood in Denver, how her father would take her prospecting during summers, teaching her to read land and recognize promising geological formations. She spoke of her mother, a gentlewoman who'd loved James Whitfield with a devotion that couldn't survive his loss. "She just faded," Eliza said one night, her voice distant with memory. "After Papa disappeared, it was like part of her died too. She went through the motions of living, but her heart wasn't in it. 6 months later, she took to her bed with what the doctor called melancholy. She never got up again." Cole understood that kind of love now. He'd seen it in his own parents. The way his father had aged a decade in the year after his mother's death, how he'd seemed to be waiting for permission to join her. That kind of partnership, that depth of connection, it was what Cole had been searching for without quite knowing it. And here was Eliza, a woman who'd been forged by loss and hardship into something remarkable. Strong without being hard, compassionate without being weak, determined without being reckless. She challenged his thinking, made him see situations from angles he'd never considered. When they discussed ranch business, she asked questions that revealed a sharp mind for strategy and planning. One evening, Miguel brought Cole a leather satchel he'd found while organizing the tack room. Inside were more of Eliza's belongings, things that had been set aside during her illness. Among them was a surveyor's map, carefully folded and marked with annotations in a precise hand. Cole spread it on his desk and his breath caught. The map showed the Red Rock mine area in detail, with property lines, claim markers, and mineral rights clearly delineated. But what drew his attention were the notes written in the margins. Dates of surveys, names of witnesses, documentation of overlapping claims. This wasn't just a map. It was evidence of systematic fraud. Eliza entered the study and stopped when she saw what he was examining. "I'd forgotten that was in there. My father made that map himself, spent months surveying and documenting everything. He knew the Carsons were trying to challenge his claim, so he made sure every detail was legally defensible." Cole studied the markings more closely. "Your father was thorough. This shows clear ownership, properly filed and witnessed. With this and the other documents you have, your claim is solid." "Which is exactly why the Carsons want me dead," Eliza said quietly. "As long as I'm alive and have this evidence, they can never truly own that mine. Their entire fortune is built on stolen land, and I'm the one person who can prove it." Cole traced the property lines with his finger, noting where they intersected with land he knew. Part of the Whitfield claim bordered his own eastern boundary, which explained why his father had been involved. Thomas would have been called as a witness to verify the boundaries. The town council called an emergency meeting 3 days later. Cole received the summons with a mixture of annoyance and resignation. He'd known this was coming. Silver Ridge was a small town with firm ideas about propriety, and his continued harboring of Eliza Whitfield had crossed some invisible line in the collective consciousness. He rode in alone, leaving Eliza safely at the ranch under Miguel's watchful protection. The meeting was held in the back room of the Cattleman's Bank, a space usually reserved for serious financial discussions and disputes. Mayor Caldwell sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable. Sheriff Brennan stood near the door, his expression carefully neutral. Harrison Fletcher occupied the seat to the mayor's right, and several other prominent businessmen filled the remaining chairs. Cole Remington, Mayor Caldwell began heavily. "We've called you here to discuss a matter of some delicacy. There's been considerable talk in town about your, shall we say, house guest. Miss Whitfield is recovering from a serious illness," Cole said evenly. "I provided assistance as any decent person would." "For 3 weeks?" Fletcher interjected, his voice sharp with implied criticism. "That's rather an extended recovery, wouldn't you say? And bringing her to church, presenting her publicly as if she were a respectable member of the community." "She is respectable," Cole replied, his voice hardening. "More so than some who pass judgment on her without knowing a single fact about her character or circumstances." "But that's precisely the point," Mr. Fletcher continued. "We don't know anything about her. She appears from nowhere, nearly dead, with no explanation. For all we know, she could be running from legal troubles. She could be a criminal." "She's James Whitfield's daughter," Cole said flatly. The room went silent. Even Fletcher seemed taken aback. Several of the older men shifted in their seats, memories clearly stirring. "James Whitfield," Mayor Caldwell repeated slowly. "The prospector who disappeared. That was what, 15 years ago?" "Closer to 16, Sheriff Brennan said quietly. "And his disappearance was never properly resolved. There were questions at the time, suspicions that couldn't be proven." "What kind of suspicions?" One of the other council members asked. "That the Carson brothers had something to do with it," Brennan said. "James had filed complaints about claim jumping and intimidation. Then he vanished, and the Carsons suddenly owned the richest silver strike in the territory." Fletcher's face had gone carefully blank. "The Carson brothers are respected businessmen. They've invested heavily in this region. Making unfounded accusations against them is reckless and potentially damaging to Silver Ridge's economic interests." Cole looked at Fletcher with new suspicion. The banker's defense of the Carsons was too quick, too emphatic. It suggested a connection that went beyond mere business respect. "I'm not making accusations," Cole said carefully. "I'm stating facts. Eliza Whitfield has documentation proving her father's rightful claim to the Red Rock mine. She came here seeking justice, not charity." "And brought trouble with her," Fletcher snapped. "Those strangers who were asking questions in town? They're connected to this. The Carson brothers' men looking for her. By harboring her, you've put this entire community at risk." "The Carson brothers put this community at risk when they murdered a man for his land," Cole shot back. "If you're more concerned about their business investments than about justice for a murdered man, that says something troubling about your priorities, Fletcher." The banker's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Mayor Caldwell held up a hand. "Gentlemen, please, this isn't helping. Cole, the council's concern is legitimate, even if the delivery is imperfect. Having dangerous men circling our town is a serious matter." "Then help me resolve it," Cole said. "Help Miss Whitfield establish her rightful claim legally and publicly. Once the truth is known, the Carsons have no reason to pursue her. The threat ends when justice is served." "And if they don't accept that?" Brennan asked quietly. "Men who've killed once don't usually balk at killing again." "Then we prepare to defend her," Cole said. "And we do it as a community, not as individuals. That's what law and civilization mean. We stand together against those who would use violence to steal what isn't theirs." The meeting ended without resolution, but Cole had made his position clear. Cole returned to the ranch to find Eliza waiting on the porch, anxiety clear in her posture. She stood as he dismounted, searching his face for answers. "They know who I am now," Cole said. "I told them about your father, about the claim. It's out in the open." Relief and fear warred on her face. "Was that wise? Now the Carsons will know exactly where to find me." "They already knew," Cole said gently. "Better to control the narrative than let rumors do it for us. Besides, some of the council members remember your father. They might be willing to support your claim." "But not all of them," Eliza said. "It wasn't a question." Cole shook his head. Harrison Fletcher defended the Carsons. Strongly enough that I suspect he's got financial ties to them. The bank probably holds loans on some of their properties or businesses. So we can't trust the bank, Eliza said. That complicates things. Most legal proceedings require bank records, property transfers, financial documentation. We'll work around it, Cole said. But we need to move carefully now. That evening, Martha Caldwell paid an unexpected visit to the ranch. Rosa showed her to the parlor where Cole and Eliza were reviewing documents. Martha carried a basket of fresh bread and preserves, but her expression suggested the visit had a purpose beyond neighborly kindness. I hope I'm not intruding, Martha said, but I felt I should speak with you both, privately. You're always welcome here, Mrs. Caldwell, Cole said, offering her a seat. Martha settled herself and looked at Eliza with kind but assessing eyes. I knew your father, dear. James Whitfield was a good man, an honest man. When he disappeared, many of us suspected foul play, but there was no proof, and the territorial marshal seemed oddly uninterested in investigating thoroughly. The Carsons paid him off, Eliza said quietly. I found correspondence suggesting they had connections in the marshal's office. That's why justice was never served. Martha nodded. That doesn't surprise me. The level of corruption in this territory runs deeper than most people want to acknowledge. But I want you to know that not everyone in Silver Ridge has forgotten your father or stopped caring about what happened to him. There are still people here who value truth over profit. Thank you, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. Martha reached out and patted her hand. You look so much like him, you know. Same eyes, same determined set to your jaw. James had that look when he believed in something. He wouldn't back down, wouldn't compromise his principles. I see that same quality in you. It got him killed, Eliza said. It made him a man worth remembering, Martha corrected gently. And now you have a chance to finish what he started. To prove that truth can prevail, even against powerful men who think themselves above justice. After Martha left, Cole found himself watching Eliza with growing admiration and something deeper. She'd survived so much, lost so much, yet she hadn't become bitter or broken. She channeled her grief into purpose, her loss into determination. That kind of strength was rare, and it drew him in ways he couldn't entirely explain. You're staring, Eliza said without looking up from the document she was studying. Sorry, Cole said. I was just thinking about what Mrs. Caldwell said. You do look determined, especially when you're focused on something. She finally looked at him and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of feelings that had been building for weeks. The air felt charged, weighted with possibility. Cole, Eliza said softly, when this is over, when we've dealt with the Carsons and secured my father's claim, what happens then? What do you want to happen? Cole asked. She set down the document and stood, moving to the window. I came here for justice. I expected to achieve it or die trying. I didn't expect to find this, to find you. To find a place that feels more like home than anywhere I've been since my father disappeared. You're welcome to stay, Cole said, for as long as you want. The ranch, this territory, it suits you. I can see that. She turned to face him. And what about us? There is an us, isn't there? Or am I imagining the way you look at me, the way I feel when you're near? Cole crossed the room to stand before her. You're not imagining it. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder choices. I've been alone a long time by choice, waiting for something I couldn't quite define. I think I was waiting for you. I bring danger with me, Eliza said. The Carsons won't stop until I'm dead or silenced. Being close to me puts you at risk. I'm already at risk, Cole said. The moment I decided to help you, I became their enemy. That doesn't change how I feel. If anything, facing this together makes it clearer. She looked up at him, tears glistening in her gray eyes. I never thought I'd feel this way again. After everything I lost, I'd convinced myself that survival was enough, that justice was the only goal worth pursuing. But then you found me and you saw me. Not the ragged stranger dying by a creek, but the person beneath. You valued me when I had nothing to offer. You had everything to offer, Cole said. Courage, intelligence, integrity. Those things don't depend on circumstances. They define who you are, regardless of what you're wearing or where you're standing. He drew her closer, and she came willingly. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered. But the second was deeper, charged with all the emotion they'd been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "This complicates things," Eliza said with a shaky laugh. "Everything worth having complicates things," Cole replied. They spent the next week preparing for what they both knew was coming. Sheriff Brennan brought news that the Carson brothers themselves were heading to Silver Ridge. Not their hired men, but Jake and Ray Carson in person. That meant they viewed the situation as serious enough to handle directly. Brennan also brought better news. He'd located Samuel Hayes, the prospector who'd testified at the original investigation. Hayes was working a claim about 20 miles north, and he'd agreed to speak with them. Cole and the sheriff rode out the next morning, leaving Miguel in charge of ranch security. They found Hayes in a shallow canyon, working a sluice box with the methodical patience of a man who'd spent decades chasing color. He was in his 60s now, weathered and bent, but his eyes were sharp when he looked up at their approach. "Sheriff Brennan," Hayes said. "Been a while. What brings law enforcement to my humble operation?" "Questions about an old case," Brennan said. "James Whitfield's disappearance." Hayes's expression closed down. "I gave my testimony 16 years ago. Nothing's changed, except that James's daughter is alive and asking questions," Cole said. "And the answers you gave back then don't add up to the truth." Hayes set down his tools and climbed out of the creek. His face was troubled, the look of a man carrying guilt for too long. "What she told you? That her father was murdered by the Carson brothers," Cole said. "That they stole his claim and built their fortune on blood money. She has documentation to prove it." "Then she's in danger," Hayes said immediately. "Those men don't leave witnesses alive." "You're still alive," Brennan pointed out. "Because I said what they told me to say," Hayes replied bitterly. "Because I was a coward who valued my own skin over my friend's justice. I've lived with that shame every day since." "You can make it right now," Cole said. "Tell us what really happened." Hayes looked between them, weighing consequences. Then he sighed, the sound of a man finally releasing a burden too heavy to carry. "All right, but not here. Too exposed. Come back to my cabin. What I have to tell you needs to be documented proper, and you'll want to see what I've kept hidden all these years." They followed Hayes to a crude cabin tucked into the hillside. Inside, he pulled up a loose floorboard and retrieved a metal box. From it, he drew out papers, a leather journal, and several photographs. "This belonged to James," Hayes said, holding up the journal. "He gave it to me the day before he disappeared. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe and give it to his daughter if she ever came looking. I failed him in life, but I can at least honor this one request in death." Cole took the journal carefully. The leather was similar to his father's, worn but preserved. Cole opened James Whitfield's journal with reverent care, aware that he was holding something precious, something that had been hidden for 16 years, waiting for this moment. The first entries were routine. Notes about surveying, assay results, weather conditions. But as he turned the pages, the tone changed. James had known he was in danger. "The Carsons made another threat today." One entry read, "Said accidents happen to men who don't know when to walk away. But I won't abandon what's rightfully mine. I filed the proper claims, followed every legal requirement. This land is mine by right and by law." Several pages later, the entries grew darker. "They've cut my supply lines. No one in town will sell me equipment or provisions. Fletcher at the bank suggested I might want to reconsider my position. Said the Carsons are powerful men, and it's foolish to make enemies of them. I told him I don't negotiate with thieves." Cole looked up at Hayes. "My father knew about this. He was on the bank board then. Why didn't he help?" "Thomas tried," Hayes said quietly. "He argued with Fletcher, threatened to pull his money from the bank. But Fletcher had other investors, and the Carsons had leverage. Your father was one voice against a corrupt system. He did what he could without destroying himself in the process." Cole understood his father's impossible position better now. Thomas had tried to help his friend within the constraints of what was possible, but those constraints had been designed to protect the guilty, not the innocent. "Keep reading," Hayes said. "The last few entries, that's where it gets important." Cole turned to the final pages. James's handwriting had become more hurried, less careful. "They've made their move. Ray Carson confronted me at the mine yesterday with 6 armed men. Said I had 1 week to sign over the claim or face consequences. I refused. Tonight, I'm writing everything down, every threat, every illegal action. I'm giving this journal to Sam Hayes with instructions to hide it. If something happens to me, this will be the proof Elizabeth needs." The next entry was dated 2 days later. "I know they're coming for me tonight. I can feel it the way you feel a storm approaching. I've hidden the surveyor's maps and claimed documents where only Elizabeth will know to look. If you're reading this, my daughter, know that I fought for what was right. Know that the mine belongs to you, legally and morally. Don't let them win. Don't let my death be for nothing." That was the last entry. Cole's hands trembled slightly as he closed the journal. James Whitfield had known he was going to die, had prepared for it, had thought of his daughter even in his final hours. The courage that required was staggering. "There's more," Hayes said, his voice rough with emotion. "I saw what happened. I was supposed to be working the north section that day, but I came back early. I saw the Carsons and their men take James from the mine. He fought them, but there were too many. They beat him, tied him up, and took him away." "Where?" Brennan asked sharply. "Where did they take him?" Hayes's face crumbled. "That's the thing you need to understand. I thought they'd killed him. I testified that James had abandoned his claim because they threatened my family, my wife, my children. The Carsons said if I told the truth, they'd burn my house with everyone inside. So I lied, and I've hated myself every day since." "But you said you saw them take him," Cole pressed. "If you didn't see them kill him, how do you know he's dead?" Hayes met his eyes with a look of pure anguish, because no man could survive 16 years of what they planned for him. "They didn't kill James that day, Mr. Remington. They took him to a hidden canyon about 30 miles east of here, a place where they run an illegal mining operation using forced labor. Prisoners, men who disappeared like James, men who knew too much or had something the Carsons wanted. They keep them alive to work the mines, but it's a living death. No one escapes. No one survives for long in those conditions." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Cole felt the ground shift beneath him. Alive. James Whitfield might still be alive after 16 years. The implications were staggering, both for Eliza and for what it meant about the Carson brothers' operation. "Are you saying he's still there?" Brennan asked, his voice tight. "After all this time?" Hayes shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I haven't been back to that canyon in years. I was too afraid, too ashamed. But the operation was still running last I heard. The Carsons use it to extract silver from claims they can't legally own. They force men to work until they die, then bury them in unmarked graves. It's a death camp disguised as a mine." "How many men?" Cole asked. Hayes shrugged helplessly. "Dozens over the years. Some last months, some years. The strong ones, the ones who have mining experience, they keep alive longer. James was strong. He knew the work. If he survived the first few years, there's a chance, however slim, that he might still be breathing." Cole's mind raced. They had to tell Eliza, but how? How do you tell someone that their father, mourned for 16 years, might still be alive but living in hell? And what if they mounted a rescue only to discover they were too late? The hope might be crueler than the certainty of death. "We need to verify this," Brennan said. "Before we say anything to Miss Whitfield, we need to know if it's true. False hope is its own kind of torture." "I can take you there," Hayes said. "It's remote, well hidden. The Carsons have guards, but they're lazy. Most people don't even know the place exists. If we're careful, we can get close enough to observe without being seen." "When?" Cole asked. "Tomorrow night," Hayes replied. "Moon'll be near full. We'll have enough light to travel, but enough darkness to hide. I'll draw you a map now. Mark the approach routes. But I'm telling you both, what you're planning is dangerous. The Carsons don't leave witnesses. They already left one," Brennan said, looking pointedly at Hayes. "And now that witness is going to testify." The ride back to the ranch felt longer than it was. Cole's thoughts churned with the weight of what he'd learned. Part of him wanted to ride straight to Eliza and tell her everything. But Brennan was right. They needed confirmation first. The cruelty of raising false hope could destroy her more completely than her father's death had. That night, Cole found Eliza in the study, poring over her father's documents yet again. She'd arranged them chronologically, creating a timeline of the Carsons' intimidation campaign. Her dedication was fierce, relentless. She would not rest until justice was served. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, looking up at him. "Did something happen in town?" Cole sat across from her, choosing his words carefully. "Sheriff Brennan and I spoke with Samuel Hayes. He's willing to testify about what really happened to your father." Relief flooded her face. "That's wonderful. With his testimony and the documents, we can prove the Carsons' guilt." "There's more," Cole said, "but I need you to prepare yourself. What Hayes told us, it changes things." She set down her pen, her expression suddenly wary. "Changes them how?" Cole took a breath. "Your father didn't just disappear that day. The Carsons took him to a hidden location, a canyon, where they operate an illegal mining operation using forced labor." Liza's face went pale. "Forced labor? You mean slavery?" "Essentially, yes," Cole confirmed. "They take men who have something they want. Information, claims, expertise. They force them to work until they die. Hayes believed your father was taken there 16 years ago." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Was taken. Past tense. You're saying he's dead after all, just that it took longer than I thought." Cole rose and moved around the desk to her. "I'm saying we don't know. Hayes hasn't been to that canyon in years. He doesn't know if the operation is still running or if anyone from that time survived. But there's a possibility, however small, that your father is still alive." The words hit her like a physical blow. She swayed, and Cole caught her, supporting her weight as her legs seemed to give out. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps, as if she'd been running. 16 years, Eliza whispered. 16 years I mourned him. 16 years he might have been alive, suffering, waiting for someone to find him. And I did nothing. You didn't know, Cole said firmly, holding her close. No one knew except Hayes, and he was too terrified to speak. This isn't your fault. But she was shaking now, great shudders that racked her whole body. All those years. My mother died believing he'd abandoned us or been killed. I grew up without a father when he might have been alive, praying someone would rescue him. How do I live with that? By finishing what you started, Cole said. By finding him if he's there and bringing him home. By making sure the men who did this face justice. That's how you honor those 16 years. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. We have to go there. Tonight. Now. We can't wait another day if there's even a chance he's alive. We will go, Cole promised. But we have to be smart about it. Rushing in without a plan just gets people killed. Brennan and I are scouting the location tomorrow night. Once we know what we're dealing with, we'll plan a proper rescue. I'm going with you, Eliza said. It's not negotiable, Cole. If my father is in that canyon, he needs to see a familiar face. He needs to know his daughter came for him. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to keep her safe at the ranch. But he saw the steel in her eyes and knew that nothing short of physical restraint would keep her from this. And she was right. If James Whitfield had survived 16 years in captivity, seeing his daughter might be what gave him the strength to survive the rescue. All right, Cole said. But you follow orders. Sheriff Brennan knows tactics, and I know the territory. We can't afford mistakes. She nodded, wiping her eyes. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dusk. That gives us today to prepare. We'll need supplies, weapons, a solid plan. And we need to keep this quiet. If the Carsons learn what we're planning, they'll move the prisoners or kill them all to hide the evidence. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Cole retrieved his father's Winchester from the gun cabinet, the one engraved with "Truth and Justice" along the barrel. Thomas had commissioned it years ago, back when he still believed the law could be trusted to do what was right. The irony of using it now to pursue justice outside the law wasn't lost on Cole. Miguel assembled a small team of trusted ranch hands, 3 men who'd been with the ranch for years, who knew how to handle themselves and could be counted on to keep their mouths shut. Ben wanted to come, eager to prove himself, but Cole refused. The boy was brave but inexperienced, and this operation would require seasoned judgment. Rosa prepared supplies. Food that wouldn't spoil, water canteens, medical supplies for injuries or illness. She worked with quiet efficiency, but Cole saw the worry in her eyes. She knew the danger they were riding into. Sheriff Brennan arrived mid-afternoon with additional information. He'd spent the morning reviewing old territorial records, looking for anything related to the canyon area. What he'd found was troubling. The land was technically unclaimed, sitting in a legal gray area between territories. That meant no official jurisdiction, no oversight, no protection under law. It was the perfect place for illegal operations. The canyon sits in a box formation, Brennan explained, spreading a rough map on Cole's desk. Only one way in and out, steep walls on 3 sides. Easy to defend, hard to assault. They've probably got lookouts posted at the entrance. How many men? Miguel asked. Hayes says usually 4 to 6 guards at any time, Brennan replied. They rotate shifts, get supplies once a month from the Carson operation. Most are hired guns, not particularly skilled, but they're armed and willing to kill. And the prisoners? Eliza asked quietly. Hayes estimates maybe 10 to 12 men currently working the mine, Brennan said. Most in poor health, malnourished, weakened by years of forced labor. Even if we get them out, some won't survive the journey back. Then we make sure the ones who can survive have that chance, Cole said. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the rescue party gathered in the ranch yard. 7 people in total. Cole, Eliza, Sheriff Brennan, Miguel, and 3 ranch hands. Samuel Hayes arrived just before departure, looking older than his years, but determined to make amends for 16 years of silence. Cole took Eliza aside for a private moment before they mounted up. He'd been thinking about something all day. Something that had crystallized during the preparations. When we get back, Cole said, assuming we all get back, I want to marry you. Eliza's eyes widened. That's a strange time to propose. Before a dangerous rescue mission. It's the perfect time, Cole replied. Because I've realized something these past weeks. Life doesn't wait for perfect moments. My parents taught me that. They built their life together one day at a time, never knowing what tomorrow would bring. I don't want to wait anymore, Eliza. I don't want to miss a single day with you that I don't have to miss. She reached up and touched his face. Ask me again when my father is safe. When we've survived this and the Carsons are facing justice. Ask me then, and I'll say yes. That's a promise? Cole asked. It's a promise, she confirmed. Now let's go bring my father home. They rode east as twilight settled over the land. The journey would take most of the night, following trails that wound through increasingly rough terrain. Hayes led the way, his memory of the route proving accurate despite the years. They traveled in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses and review the plan one final time. Brennan spread the map on a flat rock, using a small lantern to illuminate it. We approach from the north ridge, he said, tracing the route with his finger. That gives us high ground and cover. Hayes and I will scout the entrance, count the guards, assess their alertness. If the situation looks favorable, we move to phase 2. Which is? One of the ranch hands asked. Create a distraction at the main entrance, Brennan said. Draw the guards away from the prisoner barracks. While they're occupied, Cole, Eliza, and Miguel slip in from the east side. Get the prisoners out through the old mining tunnel that Hayes says exits near the creek bed. And if things go wrong? Miguel asked. Then we improvise, Cole said. But the priority is getting those men out alive. We can't win a straight fight against armed guards while protecting weakened prisoners. Stealth and speed are our only advantages. They rode on, climbing higher into the hills. The land grew wilder, less touched by civilization. This was country where a man could disappear and never be found, where screams wouldn't carry beyond the canyon walls. The perfect place for the kind of evil the Carsons had built. Dawn was still 2 hours away when Hayes finally held up a hand, signaling them to stop. Just over that rise, he said quietly. The canyon entrance is about a quarter-mile beyond. We go on foot from here. They dismounted and secured the horses in a small grove where they'd be hidden but accessible if needed for a quick escape. Cole checked his father's Winchester one more time, making sure it was loaded and ready. The weight of it felt right in his hands, like Thomas himself was there offering support. Eliza moved close to him, her own rifle held with competent familiarity. Her father had taught her well. Whatever they found in that canyon, she'd face it with courage. "Stay close to me," Cole said, "no matter what happens." She nodded, her face pale but determined in the pre-dawn light. They climbed the rise carefully, staying low, using rocks and scrub brush for cover. At the top, they bellied down and looked into the canyon below. What they saw made Cole's blood run cold. The operation was larger than Hayes had described. Not just a mining camp, but a full prison complex. Rough buildings, a tall fence topped with barbed wire, guard towers at two corners. And in the open yard, barely visible in the darkness, men moved with the slow, pained shuffle of those who'd forgotten what freedom felt like. Somewhere down there, if fate had been kind, was James Whitfield. They watched for over an hour as the camp below slowly came to life with the approaching dawn. Guards emerged from the main building, yawning and stretching. 6 of them, just as Hayes had estimated, but they looked more alert than he'd suggested. These weren't lazy hired guns. They were disciplined, organized, running this operation with military precision. "This changes things," Brennan whispered. "They've upgraded security since Hayes was last here." The prisoners began emerging from their barracks, a long, low building with no windows. 12 men shuffled into the yard, their movements painful to watch. They were thin, some limping, all bearing the marks of prolonged suffering. Guards herded them toward the mine entrance, rifles ready, though the prisoners showed no sign of resistance. Where would they run in this remote canyon with no strength left to flee? Cole scanned each face, trying to see if any of them could be James Whitfield. But the distance was too great, and years of hardship could change a man beyond recognition. Eliza lay beside him, her breathing rapid and shallow. He could only imagine what she was feeling, knowing her father might be among those broken men below. "There," Hayes breathed suddenly, pointing. "The one in the back, moving slow. That's James. I'd know that walk anywhere, even after all these years." Cole focused on the man Hayes indicated, older than the others, grey-haired and bent, but there was something in his bearing that suggested he hadn't been completely broken. He walked with his head up, even if his body was failing him. "Papa," Eliza whispered, tears streaming silently down her face. "Oh, Papa." Cole put a hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble with the effort of staying quiet. Every instinct she had probably screamed to run down there, to call out to her father. But that would doom them all. "We can't wait for nightfall," Cole said quietly to Brennan. "Those men go into that mine. We might not see them again for hours. Some of them look like they won't survive another day in those conditions." "Agreed," Brennan said. "We move now, while they're focused on getting the prisoners to work. Hayes, you and the ranch hands create that distraction at the main entrance. Make it loud, make it look like a serious threat. Miguel, you're with me. We'll take out the guard towers. Cole, Eliza, you get those prisoners to the east tunnel. 10 minutes, then we all converge at the escape route." It was a desperate plan, built on timing and luck, but it was all they had. They split up, each group moving to their assigned positions. Cole and Eliza circled around to the east side of the canyon, where the fence was lowest and the cover was best. They waited for the signal, a gunshot that would announce the distraction. Cole counted the seconds, his heart hammering. Beside him, Eliza gripped her rifle with white-knuckled intensity. They were so close to her father now, close enough that if things went wrong, she'd have to watch him die. The gunshot cracked through the morning air, followed by several more in rapid succession. Shouting erupted from the main entrance. Guards ran toward the commotion, exactly as planned. Cole and Eliza moved fast, cutting through the fence wire with tools they'd brought, creating an opening large enough to slip through. The prisoners had stopped at the mine entrance, confused by the sudden chaos. The guards who'd been herding them had left them standing there, unguarded for the first time in years. Cole and Eliza ran toward them, staying low. "James Whitfield," Cole called out urgently. "We're here to get you out. All of you. But you need to move now." The prisoners stared at them with the dull incomprehension of men who'd stopped believing in rescue long ago. Then the older man, the one Hayes had identified as James, stepped forward. His eyes, though sunken and tired, suddenly blazed with hope and disbelief. "Elizabeth," he whispered, staring at Eliza, "is that truly you?" "It's me, Papa," she said, tears flowing freely now. "I came for you. We're taking you home." Something broke in James Whitfield's face then. Years of carefully maintained survival instinct, of tamped down emotion, all shattered at once. He reached for his daughter with shaking hands, and when she embraced him, he wept like a man who'd forgotten tears were possible. "We don't have time for this," Cole said, though his voice was gentle. "We need to move. The tunnel, where is it?" James pulled back from his daughter, wiping his eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse from disuse and abuse. "East wall of the mine, about 50 yards in. It was supposed to be sealed, but the Carsons never bothered. They didn't think any of us had the strength to escape." "Can you walk?" Eliza asked, supporting him. "I'll crawl if I have to," James replied. "These men," he gestured to the other prisoners, "they've been waiting for hope. Some of them have been here almost as long as me. We leave together or not at all?" Cole counted heads. 12 prisoners, all in various states of poor health. Getting them through the tunnel and out of the canyon was going to be harder than he'd anticipated. But there was no choice now. The distraction wouldn't last forever. "Everyone who can move on their own, start toward that mine entrance," Cole ordered. "Those who need help, pair up with someone stronger. We stay together, we stay quiet, and we move fast." The prisoners responded with surprising speed, years of following orders, making them efficient even in their weakened state. They helped each other toward the mine entrance, moving as quickly as their damaged bodies allowed. Gunfire erupted from the front of the camp, more intense now. Brennan and Miguel were engaging the guards from the towers. The plan was working, but barely. Cole could hear shouting, orders being barked. The guards were organized, trying to contain multiple threats at once. "Inside," Cole urged, herding the last of the prisoners into the mine entrance. The darkness swallowed them, and for a moment, panic threatened. They had limited light, unfamiliar terrain, and a dozen men who could barely walk. But James moved to the front, his memory of the place overriding his physical weakness. "This way," James said. "Stay close to the left wall. There are shafts that drop off to the right. Men have died falling into them." They moved through the mine in a stumbling line, each person keeping a hand on the shoulder of the one in front. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old sweat and despair. How many men had died in this place, Cole wondered. How many bodies lay in those shafts James warned about? The tunnel James mentioned appeared after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, and it angled sharply downward. Water trickled along the bottom, evidence that it led to the creek bed outside. "One at a time," James instructed. "Take it slow. The rocks are slippery, and if you fall, you'll take everyone behind you down." James insisted on going last, making sure all his fellow prisoners made it through before he'd save himself. It was a gesture that spoke to his character, to the man he'd remained despite 16 years of brutality. Eliza went in the middle of the line, and Cole brought up the rear with James. They were halfway through when the explosion came. The sound rolled through the tunnels like thunder, shaking loose dirt and small rocks. Someone at the front of the line cried out in fear. "Keep moving," Cole shouted. "Don't stop." "That was the distraction ending," James said quietly. "Your friends set something big to cover the escape. Now the guards will realize what's happened. They'll be coming for us. Then we need to move faster," Cole said. They emerged from the tunnel into the pale morning light near the creek bed, exactly where Hayes had promised they would. The rescue team was there, helping prisoners to their feet, distributing water, preparing for the hard journey ahead. But they weren't alone. Standing on the ridge above them were 6 men on horseback. And in the center, unmistakable even from a distance, were Jake and Ray Carson. They'd arrived at their prison camp just in time to witness the escape, and the rage on their faces promised violence. Well, Jake Carson called down, his voice carrying across the canyon. "Cole Remington, we've been looking forward to meeting you, and I see you've found our operation. That's unfortunate for you." Cole positioned himself in front of the prisoners, his father's Winchester held ready. Sheriff Brennan and Miguel moved to flank him, creating a defensive line. The ranch hands took positions protecting the weakest prisoners. It was a desperate formation, outnumbered and trapped against the canyon wall. Jake Carson was a big man, broad-shouldered with a face that had seen too many fights and won most of them through sheer viciousness. His brother Ray was leaner, with cold eyes that showed no trace of conscience. Together, they'd built an empire on theft and murder, and they clearly had no intention of letting it crumble now. "You're trespassing, Mr. Remington," Jake said, urging his horse down the slope toward them. "And you've stolen our property." "Those men belong to us." "These men belong to no one," Cole replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "They're prisoners, held illegally, forced into labor. What you've built here is slavery and murder." Ray Carson laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Big words from a man who's about to die. You should have minded your own business, Remington. Should have let the girl go. Let the past stay buried." "The girl has a name," Eliza said, stepping forward despite Cole's attempt to hold her back. "Elizabeth Whitfield, daughter of James Whitfield, the man you murdered. Except you didn't murder him, did you? You did something worse. You kept him alive in this hell for 16 years. Jake's face darkened. "Your father was weak, wouldn't sell his claim, wouldn't see reason. So we taught him the price of stubbornness. We could have killed him quick, but where's the profit in that? He had knowledge, skills we could use. Same with all these men. They had something we wanted, so we took it." "And now?" Brennan asked. "You planning to take us too?" Ray Carson drew his revolver. "We're planning to eliminate a problem. Can't have witnesses. Can't have you going back to Silver Ridge with your stories and your proof. So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to die in this canyon, and we're going to tell everyone that you attacked our legitimate operation and forced us to defend ourselves." "You'll never make that story stick," Brennan said. "I'm the sheriff. People know I left to investigate this place, and people will believe that a sheriff got in over his head and died in the line of duty," Ray replied. "Tragic, really. We might even erect a memorial." Cole's mind raced, calculating angles and odds. They were in a bad position, caught in the open, with injured men to protect. The Carsons had high ground and numbers. A straight fight would end in slaughter. They needed an advantage, something to shift the balance. James Whitfield moved forward, his voice stronger than it had been. "Jake Carson, Ray Carson, I want you to look at me. Really look at what you've done." The brothers turned their attention to him, and for the first time, recognition flickered across Jake's face. "James Whitfield, I'll be damned. You're still alive." "Still alive," James confirmed. "Despite everything you did to break me, to destroy me, I survived. And more than that, I kept records. Every prisoner who died here, I memorized their names. Every crime you committed, I witnessed. You thought keeping me alive was using me, but really, you were creating the perfect witness against yourselves." "That's a nice speech, old man," Jake said. "But dead men can't testify." He raised his gun, aiming at James. Eliza screamed and threw herself in front of her father. Cole moved simultaneously, bringing the Winchester up. But it was Miguel who fired first, his shot taking one of the Carson men from his saddle. Chaos erupted. The Carson's men returned fire, bullets kicking up dirt and ricocheting off rocks. Cole pulled Eliza and James down behind a boulder, providing cover while Brennan and the others engaged in earnest. The prisoners scattered, seeking whatever protection the terrain offered. The firefight was intense but brief. Cole's training and his father's rifle proved deadly accurate. He dropped 2 men in quick succession, firing with the cold precision of someone protecting what he loved. Brennan's law enforcement experience showed as he moved efficiently, taking calculated shots that counted. Miguel took a bullet to the shoulder but kept fighting, his face grimacing with pain, but his aim steady. The ranch hands, men who'd spent years hunting and protecting livestock from predators, proved themselves capable in this deadlier kind of confrontation. They fought with the determination of men defending something they believed in. Ray Carson went down next, a shot from Brennan catching him in the chest. He fell from his horse with a look of surprise, as if he'd never truly believed he could die. His brother Jake roared with rage, spurring his horse forward recklessly. Cole aimed, squeezed the trigger, and watched Jake's horse stumble as the bullet found its mark. The animal went down hard, throwing Jake to the ground. He rolled, came up firing wildly, more anger than aim. But he was dangerous still, cornered and desperate. The remaining Carson men, seeing their employers dead or dying, lost their stomach for the fight. 2 fled back up the canyon ridge. The last threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. The silence that followed the gunfire was almost as shocking as the violence had been. Cole moved quickly to where Jake Carson lay, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle from the fall. The man's gun had skittered away, leaving him defenseless. Blood soaked his shirt from where one of Brennan's shots had caught him in the side. He wasn't going to die immediately, but without medical attention he wouldn't last long. "It's over," Cole said, standing over him. "Your operation, your empire, all of it. We have witnesses, we have evidence, and we have the law on our side now." Jake spat blood, his face contorted with pain and fury. "You think this changes anything? Men like us don't stay down. We have friends, influence, money. You're nobody, Remington. A rancher playing hero." "I'm someone who keeps his word," Cole replied. "I told Eliza I'd help her find justice for her father. I told those prisoners they'd be free. And I'm telling you now that you'll face trial for what you've done. That's more mercy than you showed any of them." Sheriff Brennan knelt beside Jake, binding his hands despite his injuries. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, slavery, murder, and a long list of other charges. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you'll exercise it." Eliza approached with James leaning heavily on her shoulder. The old man looked down at his captor with an expression that held no triumph, only deep weariness. 16 years, James said quietly. 16 years you stole from me, from my daughter, from my wife who died, believing I'd abandoned her. You took everything I built and twisted it into something evil. Jake laughed, a wet, painful sound. "And I'd do it again. Men like you, soft men with principles, you're meant to be used by men like me. That's how the world works." "No," James said. "That's how you chose to make it work. But that world is ending for you now." They moved the prisoners away from the carnage, getting them water and what medical attention they could provide from their limited supplies. Miguel's shoulder wound was serious, but not fatal. Rosa would have strong words for him when they returned, but he'd survive. 2 of the prisoners were in critical condition, years of abuse finally taking their toll. They might not survive the journey back to Silver Ridge. Cole found a small music box among James's meager possessions in the prison barracks. It was delicate, worn, with a ballerina that no longer spun. Eliza gasped when she saw it. "I remember this," she said, taking it carefully. "Mama gave it to me when I was 5. I thought it was lost when Papa disappeared. I kept it," James said softly. "Every day in that place, I'd look at it and remember why I had to survive. I had a daughter out there somewhere. I had to believe she was alive, that she might come looking for me someday. That hope was all that kept me breathing." Eliza clutched the music box to her chest, tears flowing freely. "We found each other, Papa. Against all odds, we found each other." They prepared to leave, organizing the prisoners for the difficult journey back. 3 months had passed since the rescue at the canyon. The autumn sun now painted Remington Ranch in shades of gold and amber, and the morning air carried the crispness of approaching winter. Cole stood on his porch once again, coffee in hand. But this time, he wasn't alone. James Whitfield sat beside him in a comfortable chair, his body still bearing the marks of 16 years in captivity, but his spirit gradually healing. He'd gained weight, his color had returned, and though he moved slowly, he moved with increasing strength each day. Dr. Whitmore said it was remarkable, the way James had fought back from the edge of death. But Cole knew it wasn't remarkable at all. It was the power of having something to live for. The trials had concluded last week. Jake Carson, recovered enough to stand trial, had been convicted on 37 counts, including murder, kidnapping, and operating an illegal mining operation. The territorial judge, brought in specifically because of corruption concerns in the local system, had shown no mercy. Jake would spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming he survived that long with the enemies he'd made. Harrison Fletcher had been arrested as well, his financial ties to the Carson operation exposed through meticulous investigation. The banker had tried to flee but was caught at the territorial border. His testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, had implicated 6 other businessmen and 2 territorial officials. The corruption had run deeper than anyone suspected, but it was being rooted out systematically now. Samuel Hayes had testified with devastating honesty, his 16 years of guilt finally purged through truth. The other freed prisoners had added their voices, creating a chorus of evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. Silver Ridge itself had been transformed by the revelations. Mrs. Walsh, humbled by how wrong she'd been about Eliza, had become one of her staunchest supporters. The social circle that had once shunned Eliza now competed to host her at gatherings. Cole found it mildly amusing and entirely predictable. People, he'd learned, were quick to align themselves with righteousness once it was clearly defined. Martha Caldwell had been vindicated in her early support, and she wore that vindication with quiet grace. She and James had become friends, two people who'd lost much but refused to let loss define them. They'd sit together on Sunday afternoons, talking about the old days when Silver Ridge was younger and James Whitfield had been a man with a future. The Red Rock mine had been legally transferred to Eliza, the rightful heir. It was producing well, and the profits were being invested in the community. Eliza had hired several of the freed prisoners to work the mine, paying them fair wages and treating them with dignity. It was her way of ensuring that the place built on suffering could become something good. Eliza emerged from the house now, carrying a tray with fresh coffee and biscuits Cookie had made that morning. She wore a simple dress of forest green, her hair pinned up in a practical style, and she moved with the easy confidence of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. "Good morning," she said, kissing her father's cheek and then Cole's. The banker from Denver arrived. "He's in the study looking over the mineral rights papers." James nodded. "I should go speak with him. These old eyes still know how to read a contract for tricks and hidden clauses." After James went inside, Cole pulled Eliza down to sit beside him. The view stretched out before them, familiar and beautiful. The ranch was preparing for winter, hay stored, cattle moved to protected pastures, buildings reinforced against the storms that would come. "You asked me a question 3 months ago," Eliza said quietly, "in a canyon before everything went to hell. Do you remember?" "I remember," Cole said. "I asked you to marry me." "And I said to ask me again when this was over," Eliza replied. "When my father was safe and justice was served." Cole turned to face her fully. "Elizabeth Whitfield, will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me on this ranch, in this territory? Will you be my partner in all things?" "Yes," she said simply, "I will." Cole reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring he'd had made in town, forged from silver taken from the Red Rock mine. The very mine that had caused so much suffering, now transformed into something beautiful. The band was simple but elegant, engraved with a pattern of intertwined vines that represented growth and connection. Eliza's breath caught as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone, which of course it had been. "We'll have a proper wedding this time," Cole said. "Not rushed, not under threat. We'll invite the whole town and do it right." "I don't need a big celebration," Eliza said. "I just need you and my father and the people who stood with us when it mattered." "Then that's what we'll have," Cole agreed. "Simple and true like everything else we've built together." James returned to the porch, his face showing approval at the scene before him. "I assume congratulations are in order?" "They are," Eliza said, showing him the ring. "Papa, Cole has asked me to marry him." "I've said yes." James embraced them both, his eyes wet with emotion. "Sarah would have loved you," he said to Cole. "Your father, too. They'd be proud of the man you've become, the choices you've made." "I hope so," Cole said. "I tried to finish what my father started. He couldn't help you back then, but he never stopped believing you deserved justice." "He was a good man," James said. "One of the best I ever knew. And he raised a son worthy of that legacy." The wedding took place 4 weeks later, in the same spot where Cole and Eliza had stood that first controversial ceremony. But this time, there was no controversy, no whispers of impropriety. The town of Silver Ridge turned out in full support, filling the ranch yard with friends and well-wishers. Reverend Morrison officiated, his voice strong with conviction as he spoke about redemption and second chances. about how love could survive the darkest trials and emerge stronger, about how justice, though delayed, still mattered. Martha Caldwell stood as Eliza's matron of honor, proud and tearful. Sheriff Brennan stood with Cole, his arm still in a sling from a minor wound he'd taken in the canyon rescue. Miguel, recovered from his shoulder injury, stood beside them wearing his finest clothes and a smile that spoke of genuine happiness for his friend and employer. James Whitfield walked his daughter down the aisle, his steps steady and sure. He placed her hand in Cole's with a father's blessing and a survivor's gratitude. This moment, this simple gesture, represented everything he'd fought to stay alive for. His daughter, safe and loved and building a future. The vows they exchanged were different from the hurried words of that first ceremony. These were considered heartfelt, speaking to the depth of what they'd discovered together. Cole promised to honor Eliza's strength, to support her dreams, to stand beside her through whatever trials might come. Eliza promised to build with him, to trust him, to create a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. When Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Even Mrs. Walsh, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, seemed genuinely moved. The celebration that followed was warm and honest. Food filled long tables, music played, and people danced under the autumn sky. It was the kind of gathering that built community, that reminded everyone what mattered when the complications of life were stripped away. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Cole and Eliza stood together, watching the last light fade from the western mountains. James sat nearby, Cookie keeping him company with quiet conversation and shared memories. "What are you thinking?" Eliza asked, leaning against Cole's shoulder. "That my father was right," Cole said. "Building something worth keeping, something that matters. That's what gives life meaning, not the wealth or the land or the status. It's this. It's you and your father, and the choice to stand for what's right even when it's hard." "He loved you very much," Eliza said. "Your father. I wish I could have known him." "You do know him," Cole replied. "He's in every choice I make, every principle I hold. And now he's part of our story too, his legacy and your father's, intertwined in what we're building together." The night deepened around them, stars emerging one by one in the vast Montana sky. And in a small town that once laughed, there was now only respect, understanding, and the quiet acknowledgement that love indeed knew better than judgment ever could. Cole thought back to that spring morning when he'd found a woman in rags dying by his creek. The town had mocked him for marrying her, called him foolish, questioned his judgment. But he'd seen what they couldn't. He'd looked past the surface to the person beneath, and in doing so, he'd found everything he'd been searching for. The ranch house behind them glowed with lamplight. Through the windows, Cole could see Miguel helping Rosa clear dishes, while Ben entertained James with some story that involved animated hand gestures. Cookie was probably already planning tomorrow's breakfast, his domain reclaimed after the wedding festivities. This was home now, not just a place but a feeling. The certainty of belonging, of being exactly where you were meant to be. "You know what the irony is?" Eliza said, following his gaze to the house. "When I left Denver, I thought I was coming here to reclaim the past, to get justice for what was taken from us. But what I found was a future I never imagined possible. Sometimes we have to go back before we can move forward," Cole said. "Your father's story needed to end properly before yours could truly begin." "Our story," Eliza corrected gently. "It's our story now, Cole. Everything we do, everything we build, it belongs to both of us." He pulled her closer, feeling the solid reality of her presence. A year ago, he'd been standing in this same spot alone, wondering if he'd ever find the kind of partnership his parents had known. Now he understood that the best things in life often arrived unexpected, dressed in ways that made people look past them. "What will people say about us in 50 years? Eliza wondered aloud. "When we're old and this ranch has passed to another generation, what story will they tell? They'll say that a wealthy man married a woman in rags and the town thought him a fool," Cole replied. "But they'll also say that he was the wisest man in Silver Ridge because he knew that true value has nothing to do with appearance or circumstance. They'll say we built something that lasted, not through wealth or power, but through integrity and love. That's a good story, Eliza said softly. It's our story, Cole said, and we're just beginning to write it. James called out from the porch that he was heading to bed, his voice carrying the pleasant exhaustion of a man who'd celebrated fully. Cole and Eliza waved to him, watching as he disappeared inside, with Cookie's steadying hand on his elbow. The old man was thriving here. His health improved daily, his spirit rekindled by having purpose and family again. He'd started teaching Ben about surveying and geology, passing on knowledge that might otherwise have died in that canyon. Some mornings, he'd ride out with Miguel to check the cattle, sharing stories from the old days when Montana was wilder and futures were uncertain. We should go in too, Eliza said. Tomorrow starts early, and we have that meeting with the territorial governor's representative. The governor wanted to commend them publicly for exposing the corruption and rescuing the prisoners. It was political, Cole knew, a way for the territorial government to distance itself from the officials who'd been implicated. But if it meant better oversight and protection for others, he'd endure the ceremony. One more minute, Cole said, not ready to release the perfection of this moment. I want to remember this. The way the stars look tonight, the way you feel beside me, the knowledge that tomorrow we wake up and do it all again. Together. Eliza settled more comfortably against him. Then we'll stay as long as you need. They stood there in the Montana darkness, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd fought for justice and won, who'd built something real from the ashes of tragedy. The wind carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Somewhere an owl called and another answered. Life on the ranch would continue its rhythms. Seasons would change, challenges would arise, triumphs would be celebrated. But through it all, they would face everything together, equal partners in a union built on truth, respect, and a love that had proven stronger than fear or judgment. And that, Cole thought, was worth more than all the gold in Montana.